So, beloved community, the power of imagination. Say it with me. I am imagining.
I am imagining.
Now say it like you mean it. I am imagining. Think about the word imagination for a moment. As a child, how much time did you spend imagining things? Can you recall the kinds of things you used to imagine?
Yes.
And so for yourself, think about what it was that you imagined when you were younger. Did you experience that imagining as fun?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, you were practically immersed in whatever it was you were imagining, were you not? And because you weren't so mature, were you emotionally engaged in that imagination? You bet. Can we learn from ourselves? Okay, let me see your hands. How many of you have things that you imagined as a child that have come true as an adult? Well, as most of you know, I was raised Catholic. And I remember imagining and actually acting out leading church services. Now, that used to actually mean right before communion, with the priest at the altar, with the wine chalice, with the host, doing the blessing, the call, and the response. So while I am not at an altar delivering communion, I am on a stage on Sunday mornings delivering inspiration. So was my childhood imagination powerful? Or was it intuition? Yes. Yes. Now the contrast is, as an adult, how much time do you spend imagining?
A lot.
That's good, Sam. Think about what you spend time imagining now. Now, you might spend more time than you think imagining, but I'll give you a hint. It's probably not as much fun as when you were a child. Why?
Because it goes both directions.
What goes both directions?
Imagination.
Imagination. So typically, our adult imagination is used for worry and fears. So we're using our imagination. Oh, yeah. And sometimes we may say, we wish we had more money or more love or a better job or something, but then immediately follow it as an adult with, yeah. Like, do we spend time like we would as a child moving into that space? So let me talk a little bit about at least how I see the difference between thinking and imagination. The definition of imagination, there's 3 different ways to define it. The faculty or action of forming new ideas or images or concepts not present to the senses. Or the ability of the mind to be creative or resourceful. Or the part of the mind that imagines things. Thinking, the definition of thinking is the process of using one's mind to consider or reason about something, using thought or rational judgment and intelligence. So which one sounds more fun? So, by looking at those definitions, as we've learned in neuroscience, that the left brain is considered probably to be more the thinking part, but imagination is creative using the right side of the brain, the whole brain. So when I think about imagination, it feels lighter. You know, my paintbrush is love and joy. It's more fluid, more open, more free. Where thinking to me takes a little more focused concentration and maybe calculating or using rational judgment or criticism. There certainly is a power in thinking, but there's a little different kind of power in imagination. The power of imagination is the ultimate creative power in your life. Maybe you should say that with me. The power of imagination. Is the ultimate creative power in my life. I'm sure many of you have heard the quote from Einstein that said, "Imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited, whereas imagination embraces the entire world, stimulating progress and giving birth to evolution." Now we know Albert Einstein was one of the world's most brilliant thinkers, especially influenced scientific thought immeasurably, but he wasn't shy about also writing articles and having all kinds of publications with his opinions on both social and intellectual issues also, which was outside the world of physics and gave an insight into the spiritual and moral vision of the scientist. He offered much to take to heart, and I will say I think Einstein used his whole brain. So was Einstein himself religious? Well, he was raised by secular Jewish parents. He had complex and evolving spiritual thoughts. He generally seemed to be open to the possibility of scientific impulse and religious thoughts coexisting. Who does that sound like? Ernest Holmes, our founder of the science of mind. So do you think Einstein used a little imagination to advance science? Oh, yes. So personally, I think Einstein understood the power of imagination. But he's not the only one. How many of you are familiar with Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning? As most of you know, he survived living in Nazi concentration camps. He was a psychiatrist, and in his book he blends both science and what they called humanism. Search for Meaning, I think, goes beyond humanism, but you know what his last chapter is titled? Tragic optimism. Tragic optimism. Meaning, in spite of what was happening before his eyes in many forms of the senses, he had to use his imagination, the power of imagination, to go beyond those senses. Talk about needing to be centered, right? To understand that there was a truth that is greater, that is from within, not everything we're seeing in the news and on TV and any place else we go. Another example is an Air Force Colonel, George Hall. He was a POW locked in a dark box of a North Vietnamese prison for a grueling 7 years. I was like, 365 times 7, wow. Do you know what he did? Every day, Hall played a full game of golf, 18 holes, in his imagination. It just gives me goosebumps. 1 week after he was released from the POW camp, he entered the Great New Orleans Open and shot a 76. Now, if you're not a golfer, the average score of 18 holes is 100. He improved he beat the average by 25%. Wow. Need some more examples? A woman whose name is Vera Freiling, she's a medical doctor, was a Jewish teenager on the run from the Gestapo in Germany. She continued to imagine that she was a doctor assisting people in the free world. And after overcoming the Nazis, the Soviet army, and a bout with cancer, she ended up as faculty in the San Francisco Medical School. And this is her quote: "Imagination can help one transcend the insults life has dealt us." So do you think imagination has anything to do with hope and faith? Yeah, it's a major ingredient. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit because there's a saying that says, if you focus on the hurt, you will continue to suffer. If you focus on the lesson, you will continue to grow. You've all heard the saying from the Bible, "Be ye transformed through the renewal of your mind." So when I was in college in the mid-'80s, I hung out with a lot of athletes, and so many of them were taking courses in kinesiology and physical education. And I distinctly remember them talking about the research that they were studying. In the 1980s, the Olympics, the Russians used the following technique. They split their athletes into 4 different groups, A, B, C, and D. Group A used 100% traditional physical practice. Group B did 75% physical practice and 25% mental practice, imagination. Group C used 50-50. And Group D was 75% mental and 25% physical. You going to guess where you think it landed? After the Moscow Olympics and the Lake Placid Olympics, these world-class athletes' scores were tallied together, Group A, Group B, Group C, and Group D individually. Group D had won the most medals. And these kind of mental techniques have been tested and validated in additional research trials. This knowledge that power to imagine, the power to imagine is more powerful than physical practice. Doing, being. And these practices are actually being used throughout medicine and the arts, including the world's greatest cellist, Pablo Casals, I think is his name? Casals, thank you. He uses the imagination and mental practice to practice his music. So is this any different than the great masters of the ages who tell us that whatever you believe, you become? Not strange to us, right? And we're using our imagination not as though it will happen in the future, because that will just keep it in the future. Using your imagination is to bring yourself into the present moment, truly experiencing it, what you were imagining, just like when you were a child. The question is, are you able to constantly direct your mind regardless of what your previous experience has been, or regardless of what your senses are telling you now. So our science of mind philosophy, where does it go along with these definitions of thinking and imagination? Well, let's start with looking at the evolution of the writings of Ernest Holmes. I forgot to bring my Science of Mind textbook, but as you know, we all use the Science of Mind textbook in our classes. And that was originally published in 1926. That was the first revision or publication. Then, with the help of somebody else, he revised it 12 years later, which is now the classic version that we use in our classes. And that was republished in 1938, so 12 years later than the original publication. I found at estate sales and over on Orange Street consignment some lots of great old books. And I found the 1919, well, maybe not the actual book version in 1919, but Ernest Holmes created The Creative Mind in 1919, as well as another one called Creative Mind and Success. And you can still buy the versions of these books. Of course, they look different and published by different publishers, but they do go on. It says something about the power of the message. And when you read these books, you can tell that they were really precursors to the science of mind. And in some cases, maybe easier to read than the textbook because it's not so deep. Because he went from creative mind to the science of mind. And of course, the Science of Mind textbook does use a lot of Quimby and, of course, Troward, who was a lawyer, the creative process in the individual. So what I'm saying to you is, even though we have the motto, change your thinking, change your life, do you think the power of imagination is at the core of these principles? Yes. And then Science of Mind created spiritual mind treatment. Ernest Holmes, using the creative mind to bring into present consciousness first cause. In other words, the highest truth. Not what you believe and then something happens in your life and then you start believing in what happens, which means you're looking at the effect. And you need to go back to first cause, as in, what is the truth with the capital T that I know about me and that I know about this particular situation? Now, as a Catholic, of course, I used a lot of rote prayer, and it has power. I am not mocking or demeaning any of that. But for me, using Science of Mind treatment allows me to use my imagination and my knowing of the truth to blend those for understanding my current situation. And then being able to put seed into the soil what I know as true. Now, where do I have that? I know it's a simple concept, but not easy to do when you're down and out, right? But we must use the power of imagination, continuing to put seeds into that soil over and over and over again through the power of imagination to see and feel the new outcome. When we do that, the power in our imagination is real, even if you can't touch it. We don't seem to have a problem understanding that about the air we breathe, do we? We don't seem to have a problem really believing in love. And do you see it? You see the effects of it. You feel it, but you don't see love. And so it is with the power of imagination. Yes, be ye like a child. Believing in the power of your imagination to set forth in your particular circumstance the greater good, the greater knowing. And when you do that, You see, you can't think outside of God, right? You can't think outside of whatever that is for you. And so the moment you have imagined something, it already exists. Now you may say, but I don't see it. That's because your vibration and what you believe is blocking getting you to the vibration of where that demonstration exists. So you may hear a practitioner say, and I know it's already done. And it's already done because there's no way we could imagine it if it wasn't already done. Now the work is aligning ourselves up to believe in that. And words that we use, we don't even realize those words have meaning that are attached to perhaps some false beliefs. Money is the root of all evil. Okay, well, there's a whole lot to understand in that line. What really is money? The exchange of energy, right? I give you this, I get that. And you know, we're doing that when we're breathing every day. We're doing that when we're circulating the blood in our body and digesting the food that we eat. And of course, there are many spiritual principles to keep in mind to get to the results that you are imagining. Yes, daily spiritual practice to stay aware and conscious of what you are thinking, believing, and imagining. And it means, in today's world, staying focused, not distracted. Even for myself, as I do my prayer, it's like, I keep moving to all kinds of different things, and there's nothing wrong with that. I like variety. But then, focus versus distraction. And not letting what you see before you, like you saw in the video, drive your belief. Which is very helpful. I mean, think about, we are so rich today to be able to inspire ourselves, just like watching that video. I mean, how many YouTubes are out there to inspire you to your greater truth and your greater knowing, living your full expression as God, as Spirit. But I'm going to say that being creative is where we need to go, because sometimes we're thinking hard. And maybe that's where the resistance is. Because imagination feels lighter and creative, trusting the Spirit's flow. And you heard with the town crier announcements today, are we doing lots of variety of spiritual practices? I'm going to start inserting more creative stuff. And I know that some of you, because I've already experienced this with one person, I can't paint. There you go, on the left side of your brain. In the United States, we are very much left brain oriented. We are going to do laughter yoga or laughter club, or we're working on what we're going to name it. But it's well known that the people in India do it very well because they can lighten up and get into it. And the Americans can be a little more stodgy about, how am I looking doing this, laughing in the middle of nowhere for nothing. And yet we know scientifically that laughing improves our immune system, and it's healing. Let go of that stodgy adult side. So I hope you'll join us. Again, we're working on having that available, and again, more creative stuff so that we can leverage more of the whole brain. So I'm summarizing with one more thing. While I was on vacation, I read a book called A Whole New Brain, A Whole New Mind. Why right-brainers will rule the future. We'll validate that for you. The book is by Daniel Pink. Not hard to forget, Daniel Pink. And unfortunately, it was a library book, so I can't go back to the specifics. But I remembered that he talked a lot about the future of jobs in the United States. is about the creative side. Yes, we automate and we computerize and people talk about losing jobs, but America has an entrepreneurial spirit. In some countries trying to create a business, you pay somebody to build a building and you'll be lucky if you get the building and the money will be gone. Or if you have a store and you order inventory, you'll be lucky if the inventory arrives. In other words, there is the entrepreneurial spirit in the United States that's very creative. And of course, all I have to do is say Elon Musk, right? And there's a book called Bold that just talks about a lot of the kinds of things that are happening that we're not even aware of. That is a creative force continuing to move through us, and that creative force is the truth of our being. That creative force is what propels us forward in faith and in hope. Are you using the power of your imagination? So I challenge you this week as a part of your spiritual practice or not a part of your spiritual practice to spend more time being like a child, imagining and enjoying the possibilities. And I'll end with a quote by Earl Nightingale, very in line with Science of Mind. I wonder in history how they connected. Whatever we plant into our subconscious mind and nourish with repetition and emotion will one day become a reality. Namaste.